Let's get started. So good day and welcome to the quarterly partner webinar. Thank you again for taking the time in your busy schedules to slot Proofpoint in your calendars to have an update. Now, just want to echo what Caroline mentioned about questions. I'm going to cover quite a bit of content. We're going to talk about the agenda and give you that in a moment. But as if there's something that I've said that you have a question on, make a note of it, post it in the Q&A, post it in the chat, whatever you can, just to make sure we get to that question. And at the end, okay, we've made sure that there's enough time in the end to get to those questions. So let's dive in. So we're going to do a few things. So number one, I'm going to give you an update on the Essentials platform. So we're going to look at Q3, and we're going to look ahead to Q4, some of the things that are coming. We're going to provide an update on the overall threat landscape, and what are the trends that our threat team is seeing. So you can take this information and share it with your own customers. We're going to dive into one of those threats, something called business email compromise. And so we're going to talk about what that is, what's happening there, and how Proofpoint Essentials is addressing that threat, that particular issue. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to make sure there's enough time at the end to answer any questions that come up. Okay, so let's start with the update. Now, what we're going to do, we've pushed out several releases this quarter already, and we have a couple of more planned for this month. So rather than just put a bullet list, I'm going to sort of dive into some of the highlights, some of the items that I think many of you are interested in hearing about. So let's start with Spoon Alerts. So Spoon Alerts is something that we've talked about in the past at previous webinars. I've heard from many of you as this is a really key item that you'd like to see in the offering. And for those of you who are not familiar what that means, ultimately it's us informing you when we are unable to send mail to one of your downstream customers, right? So if for whatever reason mail's not being delivered, our system is the first to know. So what we're going to do, and this is going to be available this month in September, is we're going to start sending out alerts when there is an issue or when an issue has been cleared. Right? So we're going to send it out. Now it will send it out via email. It will also send it out via text if you've set it up that way to notify you via SMS, and as long as you have a mobile number. So we'll send you those alerts when it's happening and when it's been cleared. There are options you can control at each individual customer level. You can choose which contacts to send it to, and we've also set this up so that you could enable it for a specific customer, or you could very easily use our automation settings and enable this across the board for all of your customers, right? So you can do one setting across the board, or maybe you want to see how this is working first, maybe pick a few more high-profile customers individually, turn this on, get a sense of how it's working, and then based on comfort levels, expand it across the board. So again, this is going to be available out this month. When we make it available, there's going to be some more information available, how it's configured, what it means, what the alerts look like. All of that's going to be available in our documentation portal, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. But I wanted to highlight Spoon Alerts because that's definitely very high on the must-have list of many of you. Now, some of you might recall that we rolled out a brand new archive service earlier this year. In fact, it was June. So since that time, we've seen quite a lot of activity. Customers upgrading to professional package to get it, existing archive customers switching over to the new archive offering. So it's been really well received, and we're getting a lot of feedback on new features, new things that they'd like to see into the product. So I wanted to highlight a couple. The first is archive export. So this is the ability to, from a self-service perspective, do a search, get results, export the results of that search to a file that you can download and open up and use or provide to some other vendor or provide to a lawyer, whatever the case might be. So we are rolling this out in September. It'll be in the second half of the month. Now, what we're rolling out is what we've referred to as a beta. We're sort of rolling it out. It's available to all of the archive customers. We're doing a lot of tracking just to track performance, and we're going to get some feedback, and then we'll sort of polish it off likely in a few more months. But we're going to get this out, get it into your hands or your customers' hands, and then we're going to solicit some feedback, take a look at the performance, and make any updates that we see necessary. But yeah, this is long overdue, so we're happy that it's going to happen. And one thing I want to mention or highlight is that this is going to be available in the new archive offering. It's not available in the legacy product. So if your customers are still on the legacy product, you may be waiting for certain features before you move them over to the new archive. This might be one of those items you're waiting for. In addition to the export component, we've also made a change or added some new functionality, which we're calling the Archive Assistant. And this is going to be available in September as well. The idea here is that we're noticing a lot of customers are having the new archive enabled, but a much smaller percentage, probably about half, are actually configuring the archive. So what we've done is as we rolled out the new archive in June, we've actually created quite a lot of content, how to set it up, how to configure Office 365 or Exchange 2010 or Exchange 2016. But it may not be readily sort of apparent where that content is. So now when you or your customers access the archive, the new archive interface, if we see that it's turned on, but we see that it's not configured, we're going to pop up a little message with a little assistant that can take you to a very detailed step-by-step guideline on how to configure the service, how to add a new connection, how to adjust retention policy, how to configure Exchange, those sorts of items. So our hope is that the assistant will be a little more of a parent. People can get some more guidance on how to set up the archive, and it'll make that content far more readily available. And just to give you a little idea, on the left-hand side, you can see this is the archive interface, and you've done a search, and now there's a new button saying Export Search Results, and then somebody can come in here, give the export file a name, and optionally you can give it a password as well. So that way, that file that's downloaded is now password protected, and that a little more secure than just completely open, but of course it's optional. And then on the assistant side, this is a little bit of a rendering of what the assistant looks like. So this is going to pop up and be visible anytime you access the archive, but it's not being used. There's no connections. There's nothing set up. Another item that this is actually, we're going to talk about this more as we talk about business email compromise. But what we call an imposter classifier. Now we've had this classifier in the product for some time, going back into 2016. But as this is another area where we've integrated quite closely with our enterprise team, and as they make improvements to their analysis and their sort of content classifiers, we benefit from those, and so we're using those benefits. We've made some improvements, and we're going to talk about this in more detail. But I want to just highlight this change. So as a message comes in, we're analyzing all of the content, things like the actual content, the sender reputation, the email address, and then we're scoring it. And then based on that score, we are quarantining the message if it hits that score, and we're also classifying it as suspected business email compromise, what you can see here. So you may not have seen this in the past. You'll start seeing this more and more now that this change has been made. This is live in production right now, and again, I'm going to talk about more about this later on in the session, and I'm going to give you an idea of some of the new things we're going to be adding in Q4 as well. Now, some additional items that I wanted to highlight. The first relates to SMTP discovery. So if any of you or your customers using SMTP discovery, I wanted to highlight a really critical change that we've made that's been rolled out over the past few months, and it's how we handle what I'm calling unlicensed users. For those of you who are using SMTP discovery, you'll know that as we discover new users, they are treated as essentially unlicensed users until a certain threshold is met. Either you confirm they're in fact licensed, or you've configured the service to automatically make them a licensed user after a period of time. But while they're unlicensed, we were treating those users differently. So we were treating licensed users and unlicensed users differently, and we've corrected that. So we now treat unlicensed users exactly the same. That means URL defense will apply. That means if they send an encrypted message, it will be encrypted. If you have inbound or outbound filters that apply to the organization, they'll apply properly. So this is a very critical change just to make sure we'll level the playing field. And that way you can continue to use estimate discovery, but have no difference in terms of the level of protection these users are getting. The other item here that I wanted to highlight is URL defense. So URL defense is, again, this is our one of the methods we use to rewrite URLs to protect users when they click on those URLs if they are malicious. The downstream site that they're directing users to is malicious. And we've had several support tickets opened up covering a range of different scenarios. One of the most prominent was how we were rewriting, in some cases, we were writing email addresses in meeting requests. So when the user went to respond, I'm going to join, I'm going to accept this request, it would be unable to send that request to the sender because we had rewritten the email addresses. So that's one example, probably the most prominent example from a support perspective that was problematic with URL defense. We rolled out an update earlier this quarter, and that update covered a number of support areas, including the one I just mentioned. So hopefully what you've seen is those tickets been able to be closed down for any of you who've had customers that reported that issue. Now on the content side, we've been busy, and we're going to continue to be busy this month and into next quarter. We have a documentation portal. In fact, I'm going to show you what that looks like in a moment. This portal is now is embedded into the Essentials user interface. You can access it right from the interface. You will find lots of content, user content, administrative content, release notes, videos. So the video tutorials, I think the last time we spoke, we talked about publishing a number of video tutorials on the site so that they're available now, and they cover some of the key topics. Now, again, one of the best things to do is to sort of show you this, because I have had quite a few conversations with partners in recent weeks, and many of them don't even know this exists. So I wanted to highlight this. So let's go right to the browser. So you hopefully are seeing my screen here. So this is the Essentials login page. I'm going to log in with a customer account. And what you'll see on the top right-hand side is a question mark, which is essentially your way of launching to our help and documentation portal. So you click that, it opens up a new tab, and here you'll find a range of information. So let me show you what's there, and let me show you what's coming in the next few weeks. So the first thing, you'll find lots of user topics. You know, so end users can also access this documentation help portal. They, of course, will only see user relevant topics. They won't see administrative topics. So they can see information about various items here. If I go back to the top, you'll see administrative topics. I'll come back in a second. You'll see release notes. So all of our releases since 5.5.0 posted here. The most recent release was 5.5.5. You can click on that and see all the items that we addressed. The video tutorials, all listed here as well. So if you're looking to how do I configure Azure, you can watch a nice 6-minute video that goes through step by step what you do in the Azure interface and what you do in the Essentials interface. So instead of reading content, you can watch a video. Okay, so all of that is there. This is where we're driving much of our content to. Now on the administrator topics, this is where we're spending quite a time right now. It's a little bit light right now, as you might notice. We're expanding that this month and should have a lot more content before the month turns over. So things you'll see, a lot of email archive content, so you can click on a particular topic and read how to configure Exchange or Office 365 for journaling, you know, very detailed articles, how to do it with 2010, how to manage users. We're also adding content in here around different hosted email services. So G Suite, probably within the next few days, Office 365 will be listed here. So if you've got customers running G Suite and you'd like sort of detailed step-by-step guide on what to do and how you should optimize the configuration of G Suite to work with Proofpoint, it's all listed here as well. Okay, so the key thing is keep using this, keep looking here over the next few weeks. we're going to be adding a lot more content. So you'll see it here, and if there's more content you want to see, just let us know, and we'll continue to post it here. So that's a little bit look at Q3. Now the quarter's not over. So like I said, we've got a couple more releases coming this month, and we have more content we're pushing to the portal. But let's take a look at some of the key priorities for the next quarter. So first one on the list here is Azure authentication. So again, this is for targeting you that have customers on Office 365. So we have the ability to sync users from Azure. We have added support on the archiving side to archive from Office 365, and we're going to be adding the ability for those users to authenticate with their Office 365 credentials, so they can hit on the login page, choose to authenticate with their Azure credentials, do so, and then access the platform. And if that's not working, of course, they can fall back to an email address and a password. But this will make it easier for those customers. Now, one item you don't see on the list that I just want to highlight, we are in parallel working aggressively to do the same type of functionality for Active Directory. That one I don't yet have, or we're not yet at a point to provide a commitment on when that's going to be delivered, but we are working on that in parallel to the Azure piece, and that should follow. Just not sure exactly when that will follow, but that is of equal importance to us in terms of improving that end user authentication experience. Another area of significant investment this next quarter will be around the spam and digest. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. Some of this comes back to the business email compromise deep dive we're going to be doing later on. But just at a high level, more controls for administrators, more information and message details for your support teams to support your customers, more information in the digest to provide your end users with information about the relative risk of the email and should they release it, as well as controls to remove the ability or disable the ability to release more message types. So lots of investment in Q4 around that, and again, a little bit more of a deeper dive on that coming shortly. With respect to the email archive, so again, continuing what we rolled out in June earlier this year, we are going to be launching this in Europe. Now, we had originally targeted to roll this out in Q3. Unfortunately, we were not able to meet that objective. It is now firmly committed for Q4, likely mid to latter part of Q4. The moment we have a sort of a specified date, we'll let everyone know, especially those partners who have shared with us the interest. So it is absolutely continues to be a priority. It's resourced to complete this year, and the moment we can provide more information, we will. The other item here, granular discovery permissions. So this is the ability to sign specific individuals' rights to search other designated mailboxes. So right now, I can search my own mailbox because I'm a user, and maybe I'm granted rights to search all mailboxes. What we're adding is the ability to say, I'd like Chris to be able to search Julie's mailbox, or Julie the ability to search Sam and Tony and Marissa's email box, right? So that level of control on who can search what, and of course, all of the various auditing that comes in place so you can see who has what access, who did what searches. So that's another element that we're releasing in Q4. And then finally, we are working aggressively on the tooling required for us to migrate customers from the old archive to the new archive. So that will be sort of wrapped up this month. So we'll then send out an announcement to all of the partners who have customers on the old archive to give them an idea of what the schedule is, what the process is. But that should be kicking off by October. And then we will work over the next 3 to 6 months to migrate everyone off of the old platform onto the new platform. And for those customers that are in dual states right now, they might be, their old email might be in the old archive, which means they have to search that location. The new email is in the new archive, which means they search that location. Once we complete the migration, all of that content will be in the new environment. The old environment will go away, and that means it's one search. And all of the new functionality we're offering, the exports, the imports, the granular discovery permissions, all of that is going to be continue to evolve in the new archive offering. And then on the support side, we just sort of touched on the documentation portal and the video tutorials. We're going to continue to expand administrator content and put more and more there. As we release new features, we're going to release those features with content published. And so we're just making sure that all of the existing features and functionality that we have documented in PDFs and in KB articles, all of that is sort of ported over to the portal, so that way you and your customers can access that on demand. And we're expanding the video tutorials. Got a lot of good feedback on those tutorials, so we're continuing the train of more disclaimers, sender lists, mass updates, managing domains, much more content coming in Q4. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. Now, in the last part of the webinar, for those of you who were in attendance, we sort of provided quite a bit of information and statistics related to the threat landscape. Proofpoint invests a lot of time and attention here. We have teams that are doing this analysis, publishing reports and sharing this data, and the feedback we received was quite positive. So we're going to continue to give this information to you. That way you can have it, you can share it, you can be aware of what those trends are. Okay, so let's go in. So the first thing I want to talk about is email-based threat trends. So last quarter, and you can kind of see the first quarter. Now we're typically with this analysis a month behind. So even though we're in Q3, we're talking about Q2 here, right? So that's just the time it takes for the analysts to crunch the data and publish the results. So you can see a big difference between Q1 earlier this year and Q2. So you started to see this sort of spike on the end of March, which was really the return of high volume Drydex banking Trojan campaigns. And the other thing too we've noticed is where these are coming from. It's coming from the same sort of bad actor, if you will, that we were seeing for large scale Drydex and Locky campaigns in 2015 and 2016. So that same attacker resumed their efforts in April with a massive Locky ransomware campaign. Now, the other thing we've noticed is there's a bit of a shift. So in the first quarter and the second quarter, the campaign started using email attachments rather than URL. So it shifted more to an attachment, where in the first quarter we were seeing more URL activity. So so a couple things. So this shift and this jump drove a 250% jump in the overall malicious message volume. So we saw that large spike from inactivity. But despite that spike, the overall volume compared to a year ago is still 50% of what it was, right? So it's still down from 2016, even though we saw a big jump from Q1 to Q2. Now, the contrast highlights sort of this massive scale and the nosedive, the change from last year. But what the quarter lacked in volume relative, again, to 2016, it made up in diversity. So we saw new ransomware strains, new attachment types, new malware across our customer base. The other thing, too, of note is that, again, while malicious attachment messages dominated the overall volume, as the sort of quarter drew to a close, that shifted to URLs and attachments, and they were reversing course. So malicious URL message threat or malicious URL message volume jumped 57% from May to June, so continuing a surge. Right, so I think that sort of just highlights that it's always changing. What you see one quarter doesn't necessarily reflect what's going to happen the next quarter. And even within a quarter, we're seeing different techniques and different trends emerge. Now, from a ransomware, this is obviously top of mind across the board for all of you and all of your customers. So what did we see? So Q2 was dominated with the high-profile outbreaks of, Q2. The high-profile outbreaks of WannaCry, and then a 1 month later with Petya. I mean, even though there's such high profile around these outbreaks, email remains the preferred vector for attackers focused on making a profit, right? So it's still coming through email. So the WannaCry, we talked about that in the last Parker update that was discovered on May 11th by our research team. That threat actor shifted course and started distributing a JAF ransomware, and that JAF ransomware quickly eclipsed the the Drydex and Locky campaigns we had seen overall this year. And by the end of May, JAF was the top malware payload by message volume across our customer base around the world. It was essentially accounted for 49% of all malicious messages and 72% of ransomware messages. So it was a very big deal. Now, the campaigns pretty much stopped as soon as Encryptor became available in mid-June. But then what happened with that? The attacker switched back to Locky, right? So oh, somebody's compromised this one. I'll just go back to what I know. And they're able to quickly pivot, and change course as the conditions and defenses change. The other thing of note is JAF and Locky have really been indiscriminate in their targeting. They'll go across the board, and they'll also evolve into other ransomware strains, and there are other ones that emerge that are a little more targeted, like Cerber, like Torrent Locker, that Serpent that we see that are very micro-targeted. Some the U.S., some the U.K., some Poland, some of the Nordic locations, right? So we're seeing some micro targeting across these ransomwares, sort of these exploits as well. Now, ransomware. So this is sort of a new term that's sort of emerged, but ultimately this refers to these new ransomware strains that are multiplying quickly. Almost 5 times as many new ransomware variants appeared in the second quarter versus a year ago. And the other thing that's noticing is that ransomware, traditionally was motivated by profit, but it seems to have somewhat moved beyond the profit motive. So outbreaks of WannaCry in May and Petya in June, they were highly disruptive. And because of the nature of how they were spread through email and web, the attacks borrowed automated techniques of computer worms to spread, but because of the speed that they spread, really the ransomware authors would not really be able to collect and process ransom payments and unlock victim files. So it appears that the focus of these campaigns are more on disruption rather than collecting ransom money. Now, social media is an item we talked about last quarter, and I wanted to highlight it again. Continues to remain a breeding ground for a variety of threats, from malware to phishing. Phishing links in social media grew 70% from the previous quarter, and fake customer accounts used for angler phishing jumped 300%. The bad actors are developing new techniques to take advantage of apps and valid accounts and send spam and hijack conversations. So lots going on there that are one in particular that's trying to leverage social engineering to trick end users to giving them access to Facebook accounts to collect more and more information. This particular technique is exploding. So it's growing from just 40 spam comments in April 26 to 16,000 in January 2017 from a single app. So there's quite a lot happening here, and it really exploits the human factor, right? That people just aren't necessarily aware of what's bad or what's good, and they're tricked, and now all of a sudden their content is exposed. And I wanted to sort of highlight one thing on that. Anytime I talk about social media, I just wanted to make sure that you were aware that Proofpoint does have an offering meant directly to address this is what we're seeing in social media. So we do have an offering called Social Media Account Protection. It's available in the advanced package. So if your customers are already on Professional or already using Advanced, it's available today. They can protect up to 3 social assets. And by protecting those assets, whether assets like this Facebook page or Twitter account, whatever it might be, what this product will do is it will prevent hacks. It will look for and remove malicious and inappropriate content. It will enforce any custom policies in real time. So this is very unique to Proofpoint. And again, if you haven't seen it yet, go ahead and take a look at it. But it's already there and really unique to Proofpoint as a way to differentiate across other vendors in the space, especially with the rise of social media and its role in terms of threats and malware and phishing. Very, very important to cover this additional channel aside from email. Okay, so the last sort of trend I'm saving for a deep dive. So this is the business email clients email compromise, or the $5.3 billion problem, and more on that in a second. So let's talk about sort of BEC campaigns in general. So the first thing to highlight is they're highly targeted. They're personalized, they're low volume, they're one-off, they're precision attacks. It's not sending lots of email and seeing what you hit. It's very, very targeted to a select set of individuals. And the anti-spam engines don't really help here because it's not like they're a big campaign. It's very, very targeted. So they can bypass the traditional anti-spam engines. They're also payload free. No attachments, no URLs. What does that mean? That antivirus engines can't help you here. Some of our advanced techniques like URL defense don't help here because there's no content that can be or at least no URLs that can be scanned and no attachments to scan. So ultimately what that means is this BEC or business email compromise has emerged as a very, very critical issue. It also highlights that email is still the #1 threat vector for organizations, making up over 90% of all advanced threats. And there's been an explosion of malware-free attacks like BEC that I just mentioned that evade the traditional technologies that are meant to stop malicious payloads, attachments, URLs, that sort of thing. So we obviously follow lots of reporting on this. One in particular is the FBI. So the FBI just released their latest report in the past few weeks on business email compromise. The last report that they touched on it was in 2015. So in that time, since 2015, they're now reporting that the number I quoted earlier, the 5.3 billion in reported losses due to BEC scams, and about 3 billion of that coming in the last year, and a 2,000% increase in the impact of these attacks. So it's a very big deal. It's a very critical issue. The other thing we are seeing is they're constantly evolving. So we're seeing a rise in partner spoofing attacks where fraudsters are spoofing trusted vendors and partners to lure money and critical information away. So the key thing here is that while training is important, awareness programs are important, right? You educate your users, let them know what it is and how to identify it. It still highlights that despite all that, users are still opening malicious messages, right? There's the human factor prevails. So here's a few examples I want to touch on. Notice no attachments, new URLs that are trying to trick users into taking action. So here's another example, a slightly spoofed name. Paul Oville is a chief financial officer for Proofpoint. So slightly different. Somebody might be able to sort of say, oh, okay, it's Paul. I should make this change really quickly, even though it's actually not Paul. And also different types, whether it's accounting changes, making a vendor payment, or some itinerary for travel, right? Slightly different things, tricking the user to take action. Now, this particular slide, I wanted to highlight this because this is overall in our trend reporting, but what we see is really seasonal phishing, right? So the types of subject lines start to change depending on the time of year. So across industries and throughout our customer base, the subject lines most commonly associated with email fraud have really held steady. So you can see them: payment, request, urgent. They hold steady generally. But what you start to see is, let's say, subjects referencing payments, they've been #1. But as you enter into, again, this is a little more North American focused or US focused, as you into certain tax season, W-2s and other tax theme lures reflected the change, right? So they started to emerge, and then of course once you get past that time, past tax season, then we see that they dropped almost entirely. So take a look here, right? So W-2 in Q1 and W-2 in Q2. So even though they're very smart about the time, the seasonality, what's important, but some things, despite whatever the shifts are, payment, requests, these things stay in time, and then we see the seasonality of other factors emerging. The other thing too is, and this sort of plays in the last slide, the tactics are evolving, right? So ultimately, what does that mean? So that, started with wire transfers, it's evolved into stealing tax information, W-2s. Now we're seeing targeted intellectual property theft, targeting engineering teams, and through vendor spoofing, partner payment changes. So people are adjusting what they're looking for over the course of time. And again, it highlights that it's hard to have a set of static policies when this is the reality of what's happening. So I wanted to just, now that I've given this information, sort of tie that back into Proofpoint Essentials. So earlier you heard me mention about some improvements we've made with respect to an imposter classifier. So this imposter classifier, dynamic imposter classifier, again, this is technology and intelligence we're leveraging from our enterprise product. And what this means is that as messages come through our system, we are analyzing those messages for relevant information, so content, reputation, email address information. Based on all that, we get a score. And based on that score, we either let it go through if it's okay, or quarantine and classifying it as suspected business email compromise. So how do we do that? We do that through algorithmic checks. We look at the address modulation, we look at volume from that IP, we look at the spam score, we look at the content, the subject, the body, we look at all the reputation information from the sender and the recipient domains. All of that is analyzed. The thing I wanted to highlight is in addition to the imposter classifier, we do have a DLP offering, and the DLP offering can also be quite helpful in ensuring that if somebody does sort of take the bait and go to reply and provide information, you can use DLP to look for certain, create custom policies to look for certain content and then block it from going out. So DLP can be another effective tool at keeping information in the organization. Now, I wanted to dive a little bit more just so you can see the extent of the content analysis. So when we send these messages to our content classifier, it is looking at various things. Does the sender have a good reputation? Looks at the subject line to notice, is this suspicious? It looks at the relationship between the sender and receiver. Is this a relationship we've seen before, right? Does it come from a trusted source? It looks and sees potentially suspicious content, and it uses that all information to score it, and then that's what information we're going to share back to you. We're going to quarantine that message, and we're going to indicate that this looks suspicious. So this is what we are doing today, but we're going to do some more in the coming quarters, and I wanted to highlight what that more is, especially dealing with such a particular emerging threat as business email compromise. Right. So what are the things that we're going to do? I wanted to give you a highlight. So number one, we're going to introduce the ability for you to tag content. So tag the subject line as the message comes through. So you might want to say, hey, this is coming from an external source. We're going to educate our users that anything that's external, they're going to see this tag. Or suspicious. This looks, we didn't want to block it, but this looks suspicious. You should be cautious when you're looking at this message. So that will allow you to quarantine, of course, if it's a known problem, quarantine the message. But if you want to let it go through, or if the person releases it, you may want to insert these tags so they have a more heightened awareness about the potential threat of that email. We're also going to update the end user digest. We're going to give them more information, right? We're going to give them those classifications because there's certainly spam, but the more malicious, the phishing, the business email compromise, or the imposter, we're going to put more information there so the user can have a little more awareness of what they are looking at, and they can be cautious about taking actions. We're also going to extend the ability for the administrator to disable the release of certain classifications, so they can release the stuff that might be spam, but you may not want them to release anything that's identified as phishing, anything that's identified as suspected imposter email. So more controls there. We're working on a new option to allow the user to release a message, but rather than release it directly to themselves, it essentially sends a request to release it to an administrator. So that administrator can then look at it, preview the message, look at other factors, other message information, and then take action. So that will be really key as another control to allow, let's let end users see their digest, but anything that might be, has been categorized as something more likely to malicious, if they try and release it, the request will go to administrator. They can then use the tools we provide, which we're going to enhance, by the way. We're going to enhance the information we provide in the message details so you can look at it and then take an action, either allowing that request to go through or rejecting it for some reason. And sort of this all ties into new controls around the spam screen, the digest screen, more controls for administrators to choose what goes in the content of the digest, what they can release or not release, workflows for approvals, and those are just 2 or 3 items that we're focusing on. We have a much longer list. This is going to be a huge area of focus for us in Q4 and continue into Q1. I've got a lot of feedback from conversations that I've had with partners over the past several weeks, and this is definitely an area that there's a tremendous desire for us to focus on and extend what we do already. So you can hopefully what you're seeing is we're responding to that and really sort of improving the fit and finish of some of the advanced controls we have already and doing more to give our partners and customers more flexibility. So with that, I'm going to take a breath, hand it back to Caroline for any questions that have come in. But before I do, thank you all for your time today. There's quite a lot of content. Caroline's going to mention this, but we're going to, this has been recorded, we're going to post it, you can refer to it, we're going to make sure you have all this content so you can digest it at another time and pull out any relevant data points that you may want to share along with your customer base. So with that, I will pass back to you, Caroline.
Great, thanks, Chris. Yeah, so there's a good couple of questions coming in, but we do have some time now, so if anyone has any other questions or comments, please do keep sending them in on the Q&A or through the chat box. Okay, so first question in is, how does the email archive handle an account that is inactive but still want to maintain archive searches? Do you have to pay for a full use license or old use?
I can answer that. I already know where it's going, and that's a really good question. Okay. So this is ultimately the fundamental difference between the archive and email security, in the sense that you want to pay for users who are using the service. Now, if they leave, then you don't want to pay for the security of that mailbox that's no longer being used. So we understand that. So a couple things. So number one, you pay for the licenses used. So you pay on your active user accounts. If during that time you're archiving for those users and then they leave, that's okay. The archive will show you a history of all of your user accounts, everyone that's active and everyone that's inactive. It will even tell you when they started or when they left. And you can still search all those accounts. And you can still, when we release the changes I mentioned in this presentation, the fact that we're going to give you granular discovery rights, you can grant users the rights to search a mailbox that is no longer active. So key thing here is professional licenses. You pay for professional for your active licenses. The archive will keep everyone's mail for as long as the retention period defines, and you can continue to search their mail. You can assign rights to search their mail. No difference. The only difference is you can't assign search rights to those users because those users don't exist. So you can't say, this particular user left, but I want to give that account the rights to search some other account. So you can't do that, which I think, as I explain it, doesn't really make sense, which is why it's not there. But yeah, you will store their mail for as long as the retention period allows. You can search their mail, you can export their mail, and you can assign rights to search their mail. No differences.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. Next question is, can we disable the real-time blacklist, and that is also for the non-Proofpoint blacklist?
So the answer is no. We cannot disable that, and I'm assuming what this is referring to is that the sort of initial checks we are doing in terms of reputation, that's leveraging Proofpoint's RBL, right? So we're using Proofpoint dynamic reputation service to scan all mail. That is part of the service. There's no opportunity to disable that at all. There are no plans to offer to disable that. Now, a couple things to note. If you whitelist a sender, then that will bypass that particular, if there's a problem, it will bypass the initial check. So the whitelisting at the org or user level will overcome that. And two, if there's any particular issues with an address that you feel is, should be removed from the RBL, then you can engage with our support organizations or go through your, go through your distributor's support organization that will come to us, and we can take those actions for you. But no, there are no plans to disable that, to allow customers to or partners to disable that initial check.
Great. Next question is, will the archive migration require any reconfiguration on the client side?
There is an element of configuration required. That is essentially, we will need to configure the new archive to resume archiving from the existing location. So case in point, we'll just talk about this out loud so you can understand the steps. You currently have a journaling rule where mail is being journaled to an existing location, which Proofpoint is pulling, the old archive is pulling from. You would enable the new archive. You might create, now with the new archive, you can choose at this point in time to move away from the local journaling and move to remote journaling. Would be an option, or you can continue to use the current method. But you would set up a brand new mailbox for the purposes of local journaling, or again, as I mentioned, just start remote journaling it. And once you create that brand new mailbox, you turn the new archive on to point to it. And then once that is pointed and connected properly, you update or you can actually create a new journaling rule to point to the new mailbox, and then disable journaling on the old mailbox. And then what will happen is the old Proofpoint archive will continue to clear out that old mailbox, but the new archive will point to the new mailbox. And that's the configuration that's required. There's going to be no configuration required to move the data. We're going to contact you. We're going to ask you some questions. We're going to tell you how much data is there, and then we're going to move it over. Our professional service folks will do all the heavy lifting of moving data around. But the new configuration is required. And if what I just explained is move too fast, a little complicated, we're going to provide that information to you. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll provide you that step-by-step guidance. All of the content is also on the documentation portal on how to configure the new archive. So we're absolutely willing to help you. But yes, it does involve configuring a new connection to make sure mail is not lost in the process. So you want to switch mail over to the new archive, and then once that's confirmed, you stop archiving to your old location, let Proofpoint clean it up, and now what you're living in the state where you're searching two archives until we have the data migrated to the new archive.
Okay, next question is, will there be documentation on what each term means and covers in the dictionary terms and smart filters?
Yes, that will be covered. I believe we have some knowledge base articles that cover that. So in addition to administrator content, we are also porting over the knowledge base content as well. And one of the things that we are doing, I didn't really highlight this, but I will now. As we touch existing pages, we've introduced a new capability, what we call contextual help. So while you're in a page, so let's imagine you're in the filter page and you're looking at smart identifiers and dictionaries, and you wonder, well, what is in this dictionary? We're going to make sure that right within that page you can click on a link that will pop up a little modal window and give you that information, how to construct a filter, what are the dictionary terms that are available. So we're going to put, it's not something that you'll have to do 5 clicks to get to. We're going to make sure that relevant information is 1 click away. Now that doesn't mean we're going to hit all the pages right away. We're going to slowly do it. So the spoon alerts feature that I mentioned, that has it. All the archive pages have it. As we update the spam and digest pages, we're going to introduce it. So we're going to keep updating each page to make sure that information is there. But to answer your question, yes, the content we are posting to MindTouch will have the details on the dictionary content.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. Next question is, will there be any enhancements to the smart identifier scans for credit card numbers, for example, numbers with spaces, bypassing the filter?
So there's no specific plans on that front. That's something I can definitely look into about its intelligence. This is one of those components that we are leveraging a broader Proofpoint framework to achieve that. So what we could do is we can reach out to that team, and as they make enhancements, we inherit them. So I can look into that and see if there's any enhancements planned on that front. So I've made a note of that here on my side, and what I'll do is I'll make sure that we have that information in the next webinar, or if you want to contact your partner or you contact your channel account manager and let them pose the question to them, I can get the information back to them as well.
Okay, great. Next question is, can we create the account subscription for more than 12 months, like 18 months, etc., or even 6 months?
That one might be a question better answered offline in terms of the subscription offerings. So I would say with that particular question, Caroline, if you could just make note who's asking the question, I think that one is better taken on email, since it's not something that I could specifically respond to, but I'm sure we can respond to offline.
Okay, great. Next question is, what type of message formats can be imported to Proofpoint archiving, and what is your suggestion to migrate Google Vault to Proofpoint archive solution?
So that's a really good question. So traditionally speaking, we've always recommended or requested that we be provided EMLs to import into the archives, and we've had a lot of requests to extend that format beyond. Probably the number one would be PSTs, and we have the ability when necessary to do some PST conversions. So I would say right now it's still EML is our recommended file format. As far as Google Vault, I don't believe I am personally, well, I know I am personally not familiar with the Google Vault format and what conversion tools are available with it. So that's a great question to take offline, and we can explore it. And when we have professional services team, we are able to look at individual file formats, and there are tools and services that we offer and we can recommend to convert file formats into the desired format that we work with. So I can't say right now that we support Google Vault, but I'm perfectly willing to have a conversation, look at that in more detail, and see if our professional services team do have that experience and what they can recommend. So that is another one, my apologies, that I would suggest we take offline. But just more broadly, right now, again, EML is what we ask for. We soon will officially expand that to include PSTs, and we will likely expand that even further by leveraging some of the tools I'm talking about, the conversion tools that are available. So ultimately, we can give our partners broader support for different file types, but we can still sort of narrow it down using these conversion tools, some that we license, some that we have built ourselves, to convert them into a format that we support, but without altering the fidelity of the message, which would impede the content or somewhat destroy the original message. But that one, as far as Google Vault, I would suggest we take that one offline, and we can get some resources to take a closer look at that one.
Okay, so there's a couple more questions that I think we have time for. The next question is, current DIR sync interval is 24 hours. Are there any plans to provide more frequent DIR sync intervals?
Yes, there are. So 100% yes. I do not have a commitment on that at this point in time. I can tell you we are looking at the AD sync sort of overall thing right now, because I did talk about the goal of adding the ability to do authentication against some sort of a local directory. As part of that effort, we would very likely expand the frequency of syncs. So with the Azure one, we do have more frequent syncs, 1 hour, 3 hour, 6 hour, 12 hour, 24 hour. We would be looking to make sure those are sort of in lockstep in terms of their capabilities and their frequencies. I would say that would be a stretch for Q4. Would highly likely be something that would find its way in Q1. But again, as I mentioned, we're trying to do that work right now. We'll see if we get that shipped. But that particular item you've asked for is going to be part of our plans.
Okay, great. And the last question coming through is all about the resume terms filter that catches too many positives, and are we aware of this issue?
So I'm not aware specifically, but that's okay. That could be that our support team is aware and they have escalated it. So what I'll do is I'll work with our support team to mine through any tickets that are calling attention to a dictionary term that's catching too much, and we may be able to provide some suggestions on how to strengthen that rule to drop the number of false positives. So we'll take a look at that. That would likely be the approach we take. That often happens. So, for example, you may be looking for certain words, but they're too broad. They catch too much. So you strengthen it by adding another level of criteria to the filter. But anyways, I'm sure you're well aware of that. I'll see what we can do, look at that ticket or those tickets, and see if we can provide more guidance on how to proceed there. I don't have any specific awareness of if our enterprise team is making changes to those dictionaries in such a way to help on that front. So likely our counsel will be to find a way to adjust the filter conditions to reduce the false positives.
Okay, great. So that looks like that's the last question. Thank you, Chris, for taking us through all those questions and all that information. As Chris said, that is a lot of information, so if you do have any questions or comments that you think of after the webinar, please don't hesitate to get in touch with myself or the Proofpoint team at essentials-partners at proofpoint.com or your account manager as well. And I'll be happy to follow up with everyone that way as well. Like we said, we are recording the session. I will be in touch with everybody in the next couple of days with an email with the replay and some additional resources. So with that, thanks everyone for joining us today. I hope you find the session useful and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.